Tonight on Boston's Race into History, at long last, it's time to drop the qualifiers. No need to hedge with phrases like incoming mayor or mayor-elect. As of Tuesday, Michelle Wu is the mayor of Boston, full stop. She was sworn in at City Hall inside the City Council chambers, flanked by her husband and children as a bevy of big political names looked on. In brief remarks afterward, Wu talked about feeling invisible the first time she stepped into that building, but then coming to love both City Hall, the structure, and what it can represent. Government that is intimately connected to the lives of the people it serves and works tirelessly to better their lives.
When we make City Hall more accessible, we are all raised up. When we communicate in many languages, we all understand more. And most of all, when we connect the power of city government to the force of our neighborhoods and communities, we see how much is possible for our city.
And Wu reiterated her belief that small bore tasks like filling potholes and clearing snow can coexist with big structural change. In fact, she argued they go hand in hand.
Not only is it possible for Boston to deliver basic city services and generational change, it is absolutely necessary in this moment. We'll tackle our biggest challenges by getting the small things right, by getting City Hall out of City Hall into our neighborhoods, block by block, street by street.
So what does that mean in practice? Later in the show, we'll talk about Wu's plans for a Boston Green New Deal and why the country will be watching to see if they succeed. But first, less than a week into her mayoral tenure, Wu has already moved to expand free bus service in Boston and pressed pause on a push to clear homeless people from their encampments at Mass Ave and Milnia Cass Boulevard. Joining me to size up Wu's inauguration and the first few days of her term are GBH News political editor Peter Kadzis and Boston Globe columnist and associate editor Shirley Leung. Good to see you both.
Hey there.
Peter, you've covered a fair number of these mayoral inaugurals. What, if anything, stood out to you about this one?
Well, Adam, it was brief. It was a tone poem to inclusivity rather than the policy agenda. And you know, that's really understandable because Wu replaced an acting mayor. The city charter mandated that she take office right away. So Wu had 2 weeks rather than the usual 2 months to begin shaping her administration. And I think you need that background to understand the brevity.
That makes a lot of sense. She's doing it on the fly, essentially.
Yes.
Thank you I saw you being charitable. You hesitated.
Well, that's to the extent to which Michelle Wu does anything on the fly.
That's a very good point, actually. Shirley, I mentioned her move to expand free bus service in Boston. She wants to build on what acting Mayor Janey did, add a couple of lines, extend the duration of the pilot. From your vantage point as a business columnist, is this smart public policy?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, the business community has long advocated for more investment in public transit. And what's really smart about what Mayor Wu is doing is that she's opening the door for alternative funding to public transit. You know, right now it's largely paid for through the state monies, federal money, and passengers. Now municipalities can be at the table. And also, if you think about if she's opening the door for what's next is the private sector, right? The private sector, if you want a better tea, why didn't you help pay for it? And so that's what I see coming next. And so suddenly this concept of a free tea, it's not so pie in the sky. It's possible if you can convince someone else to pay for it.
I'm really interested to hear you mention the private sector. It's been discussed elsewhere, and I think here on GBH as well, that there's ambivalence about her plans for freeing the tea at the state level. Is there interest or appetite in the private sector for chipping in funds to help her vision grow, do you think?
if Mayor Wu, that's a priority for Mayor Wu, it will be a priority for the business community. I mean, you're already starting, some of this discussion is already starting to happen. Developers, should there be a business improvement district created and the money collected from that go to a better tea or subsidizing tea? Look at, some of this is already starting to happen with the Orange Line. Look at what the Encore Casino, as part of their deal in Everett, Encore gives money for the Orange Line. So I think in the future, you're going to start to see this.
Very interesting. One more question for you, Shirley, and then I'll go right back to you, Peter. Michelle Wu also just tapped Shogun Itawu, the former head, I guess he's still the head of the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts. He is going to be joining her administration as her economic opportunity chief. Let's take a quick look at him making the announcement about his impending move last night.
On December 31st, 2021, I will end my tenure with the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, but just a few short days later, on January the 3rd, I will begin a new chapter as the Chief of Economic Opportunity for the Mayor Wu administration.
Yes, you're good! Yes, sir!
What really struck me in that tweet from Java with Jimmy, thanks for letting us use it, is the intense excitement that people responded to the announcement with. What's your take on this move?
I mean, this move is good for Shogun. This is good for Boston. I can't think of anyone else who's been more vocal about the need for economic equity. And he has been a big critic of the city of Boston, particularly on his record of contracting dollars to Black and brown businesses. I mean, only 1.2% of the billions of dollars the city spends on contracting goes to Black and brown businesses. And here's his chance to lift entrepreneurs of color. What's also really smart about this move, it takes some of the pressure off of Wu herself to deliver an equitable economy. I mean, again, that was something that all the mayoral candidates talked about. And here, the pressure will be on, not squarely on Shogun, but there will be a lot of pressure on Shogun to deliver on this agenda.
Peter Kadzis, another thing of note that Michelle Wu did during her first week in office was make her first political endorsement as mayor. She went to East Boston to publicly back her former council colleague and very close friend, Lydia Edwards, who's running in a state Senate election, a special election for the first Suffolk and Middlesex seat. She has an opponent in the Democratic primary, Anthony D'Ambrosio. Let's take a look at the pitch that Michelle Wu made, telling people in that district why they should elect Lydia Edwards.
Across all of our communities, people are ready to take on big challenges and to do so in a way that truly brings everyone into the conversation. There is no better partner to do this work at the State House than Lydia Edwards. I need Lydia Edwards at the State House.
At the end there, I think you see Wu channeling Barack Obama saying, I need Ed Markey in the U.S. Senate. Is there a risk here, Peter, for Mayor Wu to go out on a limb for a colleague and close friend so early in her tenure?
Risk-free, Adam, risk-free. It's quite natural for a mayor to support longtime friends, especially if they're ideological soulmates. The special election for the first Suffolk Middlesex Senate seat is a tricky one, though. Revere, Winthrop, and Chelsea are home turf to D'Ambrosio. And D'Ambrosio himself is a Revere school committee member who was a scholarship kid at Yale. Lydia Edwards, of course, represents East Boston, and Chinatown is part of the district.
Cambridge a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, Cambridge a little bit. And by the way, I think that could become a battleground area for determining who wins. But there's a whiff of the locally born versus the talented person from elsewhere here. Edwards is a daughter of a military family. So Edwards grew up all around the world. Edwards' endorsement is something of a test for Wu's political locomotive. So you're right in asking about whether there's a risk, but I would say it's
negligible.
It's negligible.
Okay. Another question for you, Peter. I talked about the bevy of big names that we saw at Wu's inauguration. There was one big name that was conspicuously absent, former Mayor Marty Walsh. At a press conference after her inaugural, Mayor Wu was asked if she had invited Mayor Walsh to the event. Here's her answer.
I was very excited and honored that Mayor Kim Janey was present and passing the torch on. This was a chance for us to really focus on the short-term, very quick transition. I'm grateful to Mayor Walsh for his leadership and look forward to working very closely with him and in his capacity now as an important leader for our city.
So I'm going to take that as no. Am I right to take that as no?
Well, Adam, I'm not known as the most delicate person in the world, but I'm going to invoke a sense of delicacy here. I'll leave that to Wu and to Walsh. I would add, however, that when City Hall reporter Soraya Wintersmith asked the Department of Labor press office if Walsh had been invited, she never received an answer.
That's telling. Shirley, you get the final question here. I wanted to ask you about the story that National Public Radio ran, hooked to Michelle Wu's inauguration. NPR, and we are, I should note, an NPR affiliate here at GBH, they took a lot of heat nationally for this piece, which focused on the fact that Boston, once again, did not elect a black mayor. They ended up deleting a tweet promoting the story. I would say a tweet that accurately conveyed the gist of the story, but the story is still online. They changed the headline, although to my eye, not in a way that necessarily makes it any more palatable. What was your reaction to this piece and the controversy that it created?
I mean, as an Asian American, I was offended by that tweet and in particular, the lead of the story. I mean, to run that story on a historic day for Wu, for Boston, for Asian Americans was tone deaf. I mean, that angle was a legitimate story right after the preliminary. And many of us in the media, the Globe included, did that story.
Yep, we did it here too.
Right. And so, but to re-examine that angle on the day of Wu's swearing in, it sent a message that the lived experience of Asian Americans, it doesn't matter, you know, that the story rendered us invisible, you know, as if we don't count and Wu doesn't count as, you know, an Asian American or a woman of color. And it would be one thing if she ran as the quote unquote Asian American candidate, right? But she didn't. You know, there aren't enough Asian American voters to put her into office. She built a coalition of white progressives, Black and Latinos, and Asian Americans. Yep. She ran as a candidate for all of Boston. So I'm really disappointed by the NPR story, and I'm disappointed by their clarification because I don't think they get it, and I don't think they ever got it.
We got to leave it there. Shirley, Leung, Peter, Kadzis, great talking about this stuff with both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.
During the mayoral race, Michelle Wu pitched an array of ambitious policy goals, including making the tea free and putting a cap on rent increases. She also stressed time and again that she sees what might seem like separate issues as deeply interconnected. And nothing drives Wu's political worldview home like her plans for a Green New Deal for Boston. A few weeks ago, appearing with Senator Ed Markey, Wu made it clear that her Boston Green New Deal would encompass pretty much every aspect of life in the city.
Housing affordability is a climate issue. Transportation is a climate issue. Health is a climate issue. Our recovery from this pandemic is a climate issue. This is a lens that we are going to see the world through for the next century.
At that same event, Markey, who launched the original Green New Deal with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, promised that if Wu won, Boston would become a test case for Green New Deal supporters everywhere.
We need the leadership that comes from the cities. And Michelle is poised to become the leader on this issue for the country, the model that says that you can, in fact, have every part of the community involved, that you can do it with justice, and you can do it while creating thousands of new union jobs to get it done.
No pressure there. So what will it take for the Boston Green New Deal to become a reality? How much can Wu do on her own, and how much help will she need from other branches of government? And how important is what happens in Boston for the climate movement worldwide? Joining me to discuss are Ellen Sciales. She's an activist with Sunrise, a youth movement to make stopping climate change the top political priority across the United States. I'm also joined by Alaina Boyle, a doctoral student at Northeastern who previously worked as a climate policy fellow in Wu's city council office and recently co-wrote a piece for The Hill titled "Michelle Wu's Victory Heralds a New Age of Climate Politics." Thank you both for being here. Ellen, let me start with you. When Ed Markey says that, to paraphrase, the eyes of the climate movement are going to be on Boston as Michelle Wu starts to govern, is that hyperbole or is he getting it right?
I think that's right. Michelle Wu won on the Green New Deal, which proved what we at Sunrise have always known to be true, but a lot of people throughout the country didn't know, which is that combating the climate crisis through a framework like the Green New Deal is a winning issue. Mayor Wu gave voters something to vote for and not against, and she was able to win on an agenda centered around issues that young people and marginalized communities really care about, including affordable and accessible transportation, a climate core, decarbonization, and really just like a shot at a livable future. And, we know that cities in particular play one of the most important roles in really demonstrating what it looks like to begin the decade of the Green New Deal at the local level. And I think a lot of eyes are going to be on Boston because Michelle Wu will be providing a new model for effective climate action that should both inform cities across the country as well as federal proposals. We know that the Green New Deal is a governing project, and that means it will require the involvement of all levels of government and society. And so even just looking at Michelle's visionary, incredible intersectional plan, that is already a blueprint for cities across the country to use and put, new revolutionary policies in cities on climate action.
I want to ask you, Alaina, to address a conceptual question. I think the language that Michelle Wu used in that clip that we showed will be familiar to some people, but to others it won't be. What does Michelle Wu mean when she says that pretty much any issue that you can identify facing the city of Boston is at the same time and maybe at its root a climate issue?
Yeah, I think that the incredible thing about a Green New Deal policy approach is that it's an approach that puts people first. So issues that affect people are issues related to the Green New Deal. A Green New Deal approach is an equity-centered approach, which means that we understand that there have been historic underinvestments in some communities, and that includes relegating polluting industries like energy production to those communities, and they face health impacts of higher point source pollution. They face, limited job prospects because of those health impacts of point source pollution. Sort of like every issue that you can think of that affects people's lives does in some way go back to the climate crisis. Food will become more limited as our growing seasons change, and that is a climate issue. So food justice is a big part of her proposal. Housing justice is a big part of her proposal. The built environment is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions. So her Green New Deal is very inextricably linked to housing and buildings. So I think that's what she means.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. I'd like to ask both of you. Ellen, you talked about how in some cases other branches of government will need to help if Michelle Wu's vision is going to become reality. I'd love to get both of you to explain for me and viewers, what can she do at the city level without waiting for the state to get on board or for necessarily more federal funding to be provided? I know that Boston's sitting on a big pool of that right now, but what are actions that she can take in the short term that will be meaningful and will show people what the Green New Deal for Boston actually is going to look like?
Well, I was going to point to the report that Michelle put out. I think she ran on a very policy-oriented platform and made sure people saw that policy when she was running. And in that, she gives a good 15 examples of just immediate ways that cities like Boston can help. And that starts by, green workforce development and creating good jobs on the city level to combat the climate crisis while also, having that same, like working with technical schools and local industries and hire more people and like create jobs in that way. It includes divesting from really harmful industries and reinvesting in a clean, just future. And that's money that's in, the Boston city government, decommodifying housing, renters' right to counsel. These are all very specific policy points that she's outlined in the past as to specifically how she's going to implement a Green New Deal on the local level. And these are things I think we're going to see in the future in other cities that are implemented because of the way that she approached this.
Thanks for taking the first shot at that. Alaina, you worked with her as a counselor. Where do you expect to see her take meaningful action in the near future?
I think the really exciting thing about Mayor Wu is that she is a self-declared policy wonk, and she cares about the big issues and the little issues. Something that she has reiterated several times over the campaign and in the last few days is that you get the big things accomplished by getting the small things done. So no pothole is too small for Mayor Wu to care about. But I think that she also is excitingly a very collaborative leader. So she already, her first piece of legislation that she'll sign as mayor is most likely to be an act divesting city funds from fossil fuels, which was initiated by Councilors Edwards and O'Malley. And that is an incredible step forward for the climate movement. She's already started working towards her fare free tea, even though she's said that her first 100 days won't start until January. I mean, she's really, I think she's already showing us that she's willing to sort of stretch with the traditional approaches of a mayor in Boston. She's willing to collaborate with other levels of government, with the city council, and to sort of use those traditional like nitty gritty details to get into the climate issues.
I'm really glad that you mentioned leadership style, because I was trying to figure out how much time we had, and I was thinking of asking you whether there was anything that you saw about the way she approaches these issues that makes her especially suited to make her vision a reality. And I think that you hit on a huge one, because past mayors of Boston have not always been known for having collaborative leadership styles. So that's a really important point. Ellen, where do you expect Mayor Wu to meet resistance as she moves forward?
I think that the biggest, resistance that she's going to face is people who think these plans are not possible or this is unrealistic. But, I think we've seen already in the pushes that Alaina mentioned that she's already winning here and this is working. And so I think the biggest resilience is lack of imagination. And even in her victory alone, we've seen that the Boston imagination and vision of what the future we all want to have is really meets the plans that she has. So, yeah.
Alaina, I'd love to get your take on that too, since you spent time in City Hall. Are there possible locuses of reluctance or ambivalence that you expect to pop up?
I talk about this issue a lot as a climate policy analyst, and I think that really the climate policy crisis comes down to investment. There's an issue of are we going to invest now in building a more resilient infrastructure so that we can better handle what we know will come in the future from the climate crisis? Or do we wait and not invest now and have to pay for the consequences later? And I think that we know for the climate crisis that if we invest now, we're more likely to better weather the coming storms. So I think that is a major barrier to climate action. And luckily, Mayor Wu has already taken steps to start that investment process. I think she makes a really compelling case. She obviously understands what she's talking about, and she's building, like I said, those collaborative coalitions to start getting things done.
In the event with Markey that we showed a little bit of earlier, she said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but I think I'm going to get it right, that actions that are taken at the city level in the next 3 to 5 years will have a massive impact, for good or for bad, on the next few generations of Bostonians. I'd like to get each of you to tell me how long it's going to be before we can size up whether Michelle Wu is succeeding when it comes to making her Green New Deal a reality. Ellen, take a crack at that, and then Alaina, you'll get the last word.
Yeah, that's a good question, but it's also a really hard question to answer. Mayor Wu is going to be a very revolutionary mayor who is going to be trying a lot of things that have never been done before, especially on the city level, to be able to combat the worst of the climate crisis. And I think there are a lot of barriers in our way that are unknown for example, really terrible snowstorms coming up, or storms that like we can see in the future that will impact the way that city government works here. And so I'm not sure that it's fair to like put a timeline on when we'll know if it's working. But I think that like, as we know, there is a very small window of opportunity to combat the climate crisis before we face a really severe, catastrophic series of events. And all of the work that she's doing now will combat the climate crisis while also being grounded in that intersection of racial justice, climate justice, economic justice. And so I think one thing that's important is when we are looking at the progress that's made, it's not just in the lens of climate, but in how climate is impacting all these other issues as well.
All right, last word goes to you, Alaina Boyle. How long should people, including those of us in the media, give Mayor Wu to show that she's doing this? You got about 15 seconds.
All right. Well, it's really hard to prove that something is better than something that didn't happen. But I think that if we start to see that clean energy is replacing dirty energy, we start to see more efficient and resilient housing, and we start to see people understanding more about climate change. We start to see more collaborations with anchor institutions like hospitals and universities. I think that that'll be a good sign in the next, let's say 2 years, that she's already started on a path towards a more climate resilient Boston.
All right. Alaina Boyle, Ellen Sciales, thank you both. This was fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. We'll be off next week for the holiday, but do be sure to join us again the following Friday, December 3rd, as we continue to follow Boston politics under Mayor Wu and also expand our focus a bit to dig further into other interesting political happenings around the region. For now, thanks for watching. Have a great Thanksgiving and good night.